Welcome back to our special topics in media studies to experience our media production techniques experimental course, where we are each week using the heist film genre to propel our potential development of two different projects. Of course, our project one being a physical piece of media, whether it's we use the term tabletop game or maybe card game, dice game, board game, a type of experiential play game as project number one. Project number two, of course, a multimedia project that is highly collaborative for some, and then for others, they're taking more of an independent production route. We are now on the backside of our Monday evening film series, and this is night 4 of 6, where we will gather together. Of course, we're only examining 5 features, and then that 6th week, we're going to come together, look at some presentations, final presentations, and see what people have been up to, what kinds of media they've been developing, and maybe even get some outside feedback. It's going to be quite exciting. Well, this week we are continuing the theme that we started last week, which really is looking at the boundaries of genre variation. So when we talk about genre boundaries, what does it mean for a piece of media to fluctuate in and out of a particular genre, right? And with Fantastic Mr. Fox, we sort of explored what that could look like in a family domain, right? The heist film, or within the context of children's literature adapted to the screen. And the special emphasis on stop motion animation as a highly technical filmmaking technique. And we're going to continue this strand and blow it up this week, okay? Specifically, we are going to push genre boundaries by looking at what's probably our most populist film in the series. And while Ocean's 11 is definitely the incredibly broad crowd pleaser, the tonight's feature is by the standards of economics, box office, by far the largest grossing film in this series, and probably the one that the most of you have seen before. But don't let that be deterrent, right? Don't let it feel like a repeat or a rerun. Rather, I'm quite excited to challenge us to look at this film in a whole new light. So let's kind of establish some context here. Released in 2010, Inception is directed by Christopher Nolan, who really grew into prominence as a mainstream filmmaker, as someone that understands filmmaking in terms of for a wide audience. He's big on spectacle, and after coming onto the scene with another nonlinear narrative in Memento, he really kind of crept up and up, through films like Insomnia and some other works, until he landed a franchise piece of intellectual property, America's take on 007, right? Batman, with Batman Begins in 2005. And this was just a smash success, but he brought a really raw, grim and gritty approach to it that was grounded in a realism. It's hyper realism, but it's a realism, at least a psychological realism that we probably hadn't seen yet. For this reason, he was kind of vaulted with audiences and critics, and he would continue this with 2 more sequels, right? So what's collectively referred to as the Dark Knight trilogy, right? At least Nolan's trilogy. As we know, these things are kind of repeated and recycled again and again. But in between those films, he had some really exciting one-offs. And he's one of the few remaining directors in Hollywood that can make a big budget film, an enormous budget film with original ideas. And that's a unique thing to think about, because we're in this age of what's called IP. It's a reason that IP or intellectual property is playing a role in our projects. We're in this age where your ability to adapt and work with those pre-existing ideas can make or break your career. And so we're looking at someone that is able to toggle the line, but more often than not, return to original ideas, right? Nolanisms, including frequent collaborative turns with his brother, Jonathan Nolan, who's co-creator with his wife of HBO's Westworld, right? Itself a strong adaptation of a Michael Crichton novel of the same name, and a previous film actually directed by Michael Crichton. Not great, good, interesting, not great, maybe not good either. But Nolan has some key influencers in his life, including Stanley Kubrick, which is interesting because we looked at one of Kubrick's earliest works, The Killing, and as our second feature. But this film's going to also draw upon a couple of other themes. The idea of surrealism, which you don't have to be versed in surrealism to either follow the movie or to kind of be able to piecemeal what that is and where it shows up. We're just adding some layers here to deepen your experience, right, with the text. And then, of course, dream logic. And it wouldn't be much of a spoiler. One of the tricky things about original concept features is, how do you sell that to a mass audience? In other words, it's a huge financial gamble for a studio to now develop features that come at increasingly expensive price tags if the ideas aren't easy to translate. Well, this is a film that just seemed to translate well with audiences in the summer of 2010. And it's interesting how it won over that box office appeal and was sort of labeled for its complexity. Maybe it's a kind of brain teaser in places, but I was kind of in the midst of grad school and studying a number of topics and themes from rhetoric to philosophy to phenomenology, and so it didn't feel to me as maybe deep or complex, but I'm starting to identify myself as an outlier when it comes to film going. So I'm curious about what your experiences either were in the past, or will be coming out of this feature. How does it? But for that reason, we have an anchor, right? We have an anchor that we can latch onto to guide us through that. And our anchor is our genre of choice in this course, the heist genre. So as you're watching this film, it's not a by and large heist film, but it's going to have a relationship with the heist film that I want you to be watching for and kind of picking up on. And so even though some of you will have no doubt seen this before, our challenge for you is to watch this through the lens of what we've been learning about, studying about, reading about, perhaps even applying directly with regards to the heist film, right? And so what are the key takeaways you can get? And so here's some techniques to watch out for. Set design plays an enormous role in this film. This is a lush, expensive, gorgeous feature. And it's just that high quality set design, but very imaginative. Again, it's going to take us to some spaces and places that delve in and out of surrealism and dream logic, but also the real world or hyper realism. And so this is what we're being quested with, is being able to, like detectives, like movie detectives here, decipher between the real world versus the real world right? As in the film medium itself, reels and all of that good stuff. Nolan, a technician, a classical technician that still shoots his films on film stock, even though they're later converted to digital. He's a prominent user of IMAX film, right? Sort of the largest lens, the largest camera, and he has increasingingly added that labor. Early in his work, he might shoot a special sequence or two or three in IMAX film, right? It was very bulky. It's very hard to come by. It's notorious for having loud internal sounds. The camera, that is, the IMAX camera itself, and so it creates complications for users. And so, but he has kind of taken the baton of IMAX and ran with it, so much so that I believe the last two features were essentially fully filmed on IMAX film. So Tenet, Dunkirk, if you haven't seen those, just incredibly lush, right? The larger lens allows more information into the camera here. Sound design, right? This film sort of was one of those things that was so iconic, its sound design and music structure, that it kind of got borrowed and repurposed. They still use it in trailers all the time. It's a loud movie, right? Since severe alert. But there's a lot of intent behind that. And we can almost think about sound design in this film as something that's trying to alert us to certain transitions. So listen to maybe the role that sound, the sound and musical sound play in telling us a story that's going to posit some non-linear narrative moments, we might suggest. Not the first feature that we've looked at to sample from non-linear narrative technique. And then practical effects. Following Kubrick's footsteps, Nolan is someone that wants, in order to create a sense of realism, he is going for practical effects and creating on-screen illusions that don't have to rely upon CGI the way that we've become very comfortable with CGI in other types of big budget films and Hollywood spectacles, that sort of thing. So in terms of our heist conventions, right? Every genre is composed of tropes and conventions. They're the raw materials that sort of make and form and fashion a text so that we then identify it with a particular genre. So here's some questions to think about, to ruminate on as we get into the film. What's at stake? And in other words, perhaps if this is a heist film, prove it film, what is the, as Hitchcock and others would say, the MacGuffin, right? What is the what's it that these characters are after? What if a heist plays a role, then what is at stake? What is being stolen or is in mind, right? Speaking of, who is the mastermind? We talk about every heist needs an architect of sorts, and so be on the lookout for that. Typically, they take the form of our protagonist, so we'll have to see. Another popular heist convention, and not always the case, but often the case, is a sense of assembling the team, right? Putting a group together with special skills. We'll see if that maintains a course in this film, or whether it's in tension with individual motives, which was the case in Fantastic Mr. Fox, perhaps was the case in The Killing, and maybe even Ocean's 11. So interesting through line of tensions there. Wardrobe. There's an array of wardrobe choices and changes in this feature, but there is a certain, when we talk about the real world versus the real world versus other cognitive worlds, pay attention to wardrobe, because wardrobe changes and choices are trying to cue us in on which arena of existence we might be in, and thus be on the lookout for a unique sense of cinematic style. Nolan has his own conventions, not unlike Kubrick, not unlike Wes Anderson, who we spent some time talking about in our lecture cast last week, that'll be available shortly. And so cinematic style, like what are the quirks and motifs that directors like to return to again and again. So if you're familiar with Nolan's canon, you can pick up on some of those things, and how might they cross over into this conversation of the heist film. And finally, ultimately, how is the heist genre used and or manipulated and or innovated? I think if a text is going to stand out and become an important artifact in, let's say, the cultural landscape at large, if not simply within film culture, then it should be doing some kind of business that is new and unique about it. And this film is full of new and unique ideas. They may feel borrowed from already, given that this film is now 10 years old and counting. So be on the lookout for how this feature might be innovating at that. Well, we have an all-star cast, even if you don't know all their names. And this is headlined by Leonardo DiCaprio. This is his first foray into a non-Titanic mainstream kind of crowd pleaser, kind of popcorn, everything in the kitchen sink type of performance. So we're not getting the the typical kind of deep character study, although there are elements of this that have some character nuances. I do think his character is important, and it's not necessarily sacrificed. But he's going to headline a movie that also features a ton of recognizable supporting players here, and we're going to come together, have an opportunity to kind of recap this, discuss it afterward, and then move into other pertinent business. All right, so 2010, we will take a look at Inception.